Hello everybody. Today we will do types of pollination. But before discussing that, let's discuss what is pollination. As you are studying higher plants means flowering plants, and you know very well in flowering plants they are terrestrial and in them male and female gametes are non-motile, means they can't move themselves from one part to other. So that's why pollination is required. So what is pollination? It is transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of the flower. Means in this male gamete is transferred from male part to female part, and by pollination both the gametes are brought closer. But pollination is of different types. So let's see what are their types. Pollination is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? Self-pollination is transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of genetically similar plant. This point is very important, means genetically flower should be same, okay? And it is of two types, autogamy and Geitonogamy. What is autogamy? Autogamy is transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of the same flower. Means in this pollination occur within the same flower, because most of the angiosperm flowers are bisexual, male and female parts are present within the same flower, so they mostly go for autogamy. Within the same flower pollination occur. And Geitonogamy, it is transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of another flower of the same plant. What is the difference in Geitonogamy? In this, pollen grain is transferred from one flower to the stigma of another flower, but it is born on the same plant. Plant will be same, flower may be different. So that's why both are included in self-pollination, because plant is same. In this, flower is different but plant is same. So this is self-pollination, and for this bisexual flowers perform self-pollination. What are the adaptations flower go for self-pollination? First adaptation is that either anther and stigma, they are born very close together so that pollen grain is quickly transferred to the stigma of the same flower. And second adaptation is that male and female part mature at the same time. Third, release of pollen grain and receptivity of stigma is same. Means when pollen grain is released side by side, stigma also mature at the same time, so that quickly self-pollination is done. These are the three major adaptations. One more adaptation is there, presence of clistogamous flower. This is new term. What are clistogamous flower? These flower never open. So if flower will not open, in them chances of cross-pollination is not there. No pollen grain can enter in them from other flower. So naturally flower is closed, so pollen grain will fall definitely on the stigma of the same flower. And clistogamous flower lead to assured seed set. Definitely here seed will be formed. So these flowers never open and they always go for self-pollination. This is found in oxalis, commelina, groundnut. One more type of flowers are there, Xenogamous flower. These flowers are open. Most of the flowers you see in your surrounding, mostly they are Xenogamous, open flower. But they can go for self-pollination also or for cross-pollination because they are open. Next pollination is cross-pollination. It is opposite to it. Cross means in this, pollen grain is transferred from anther to the stigma of a different plant. This point is made. Means in this, pollen grain from one plant is transferred to the stigma of another plant. Means here plant becomes genetically different. It becomes genetically very separate. So when two plants are involved, you can say it is cross-pollination. It is also called Xenogamy. But as in this case, pollen grain is transferred to other plants which are present at very large distances, and for this various agencies are required. Okay, that may be abiotic agencies or biotic. Abiotic means pollen grains may be transferred from one plant by air, by water, by insects, by birds, by bats, etc. Cross-pollination, as I earlier told you, in which pollen grains are transferred from one plant to other plant. But for cross-pollination, different agencies are required. Why? Because pollen grains have to travel hundreds to thousands of kilometers of distances to reach on the other plant. So various agencies are required, but major three agencies are there. Pollen grains may be transferred to other plant by air. This is called anemophilous condition. Second, pollination may be transferred done by water. It is called hydrophily. Third, major pollination is done by insect. It is called entomophily. Pollination depends upon the structure of the flower, plant and the type of habitat. So let's discuss first pollination by air. Which flowers are pollinated by air? It is specially found in monocot plant like wheat, grass, maize. Why? In them air helps in pollination because their flowers are not showy. They are small in size. They are not borne in inflorescence. And major point, they don't produce any nectar or any fragrance. Okay, so that's why they are dependent on air because insects and birds are not attracted towards dull colored flower. So their flowers are mostly dull and small. So in them pollination occur by air. Air carry the pollen grains from one plant to other plant. And what are the adaptations in these plants which are pollinated by air? They produce pollen grains in abundance. Like in millions they produce pollen grain because when pollen grains are traveling by air, lot of pollen grains get wasted on their way. Moreover, their anther and stigma position is also very specific. Their anthers and stigma are exerted, means they are outside, exposed. Mainly their stigma is feathery so that it can capture the pollen grain from air. And their anthers are in hanging position, which are called versatile anther. So when air blows over the anthers, quickly pollen grains come out. So these are the adaptations by anemophilous flowers. Pollination by water is called as hydrophily. It occurs in seagrass, Vallisneria, etc. This pollination occurs about 30 genera of monocot plants. Most of us have this notion that whatever plants are there in water, all are pollinated by water. But it's not true. There are hundreds of plants growing in water, but not pollinated by water. Rather, they are pollinated by insects and birds. Only some categories of plants are there which are pollinated by water. This further is of two types. Pollination may occur above the surface of water or it may occur below the surface of water. When pollination occurs above the water, it is called epihydrophily. But when it occurs below the surface of water, it is called hypohydrophily. Now, what are the adaptations found in what plants pollinated by water? First, they are also not showy like wind-pollinated flowers because they don't have to attract insects or birds. They are not borne in inflorescence, don't produce any nectar, and main part is that their pollen grain and other floral parts are unwettable, means they are covered by mucilage covering so that they don't decay in water. They are not affected by water. Two examples, let's take sea grasses. This is the example in which pollination occurs below the surface of water. In this case, pollen grain is filamentous and ribbon-like and it coils around the stigma and does pollination below the water and seed is formed. Vallisneria. This is dioecious plant Very beautiful plant. In this, male and female flowers are born on separate plant, and both flowers are brought on the surface of water, and anther or stamen flow with the help of water and carry towards female flower. Means by water current, pollen grains are carried towards female flower and it is pollinated. Pollination by insects. This is called as entomophilic condition, and such flowers are called entomophilous flowers. Now, what are the adaptations in the flowers or plants which are pollinated by insect? They are very beautiful. They are showy, brightly colored. Why? Because they have to attract insects toward them. In previous cases, like which were pollinated by air or water, they were not showy. But here flowers are brightly colored. And if flowers are small, you have seen such flowers are born in bunches or they make inflorescence. They are born in clusters so that insects are attracted towards them. Even flowers give reward to insects to attract them. What are the 2 or 3 major rewards flowers give to insects? First is nectar, flower juice. Second is pollen grain. They produce edible pollen grain so that insects visit these flowers for eating pollen grain, and this way those flowers will be pollinated. And third reward they give them shelter for laying eggs for insects. And what about their pollen grain? It is very specific. Pollen grains of most of the insect pollinated flowers are sticky. They have certain chemical on their surface which is made up of pollen kit. So when insect visit the flower to collect nectar or pollen grain, insects stick to their legs. These are the examples: salvia, rose, amorphophallus, yucca. These are very bright flowers which are pollinated by insect. What are the different insects which pollinate the flower? These are bees, butterflies, wasps, moth. Again, they show differences. Don't think they will pollinate same kind of flower. Bees mostly pollinate blue and purple violet colored flowers. And butterflies pollinate red colored flowers. And moths, they pollinate white flower. Means different flower colors fascinate different type of insect. And there are some flowers which produce very offensive smell, bad odor. Those are pollinated by flies. Even flies also pollinate the flowers. This is pictorial representation of types of pollination. First is self-pollination. I told you self-pollination is of 2 types, autogamy and Geitonogamy. In autogamy, see here, pollen grain is transferred to the stigma of the same flower. Means within the same flower, pollination is occurring. It's not going anywhere. Second is Geitonogamy. You can see here. In Geitonogamy, it is also a self-pollination, but pollen grain is transferred from one flower to the stigma of another flower, but plant is same. If plant is same, then also it is considered self-pollination. Next is cross-pollination or xenogamy. In this, pollen grain is transferred from anther of one plant to the stigma of another plant. Means both the plants are different genetically. So when plants become different, it is called cross-pollination. Here few pollination have been shown. That is, wind pollination is there. It is in maize. You can see its character. Flowers are very dull, small, and they have hanging anthers. These are hanging anthers. And they produce abundant of pollen grains in air. And they have long style. Maize have long style which are called tassel to capture the pollen grain. They are brush-like, feather-like to capture the pollen grain. One more pollination is there, pollination by water. You can see it is found in Vallisneria. This pollination occurs above the surface of water. Here it will occur. Flowers may be below the surface. So this is dioecious plant. Male flowers float on the surface of water and female flower uncoil and come above, and pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma. But it occurs above the surface of water. After pollination, female flower go down. That's it.